The sound of her son's car engine faded into the distance, leaving Clara alone at the entrance of Sunrise Rest Home. She stood there, feeling the rough gravel under her feet, as the reality of her new situation began to sink in. Hello. Welcome. Enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. This was to be her home now, a place for the elderly, those whom society often forgot. The realization hit her hard, and her heart ached with a sadness that was almost unbearable. Clara had just turned 58, not quite old enough to consider herself elderly. But her son, Lucas, had insisted. "It's for your own good, Mom," he had said, trying to sound convincing, though his voice betrayed his discomfort. "You need proper care, and I can't be there all the time." She had known this day was coming, yet she had hoped it never would. Clara had spent her life caring for others. First her husband, who passed away too soon, and then Lucas, raising him alone. She had never thought the day would come when her son would decide that she needed someone to care for her. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lobby was warm and inviting, but it did little to ease the coldness she felt inside. A nurse greeted her with a kind smile, introducing herself as Linda. "Welcome to Sunrise, Mrs. Garcia. Let me show you to your room." Clara followed Linda down a long hallway, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. As they walked, she noticed the other residents, some sitting together in the common areas, others alone in their rooms. They all looked content, but Clara couldn't imagine herself ever feeling the same way. How could she, when her heart was filled with such sadness? Her room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto a well-kept garden. Linda helped her unpack, making small talk to fill the silence, but Clara's responses were minimal. When Linda finally left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, wondering how her life had come to this. Days passed slowly. Clara kept to herself, avoiding the group activities that the staff encouraged. She missed her old life, her house, her friends, even the mundane routines she had once taken for granted. She especially missed Lucas, though she tried not to let him know. Every time he called, she put on a brave face, telling him that everything was fine. But in reality, she felt lost, like a ship adrift in a vast, empty sea. One afternoon, as Clara sat by the window in the common room, pretending to read a book, she noticed a man sitting across the room. He was about her age, with salt and pepper hair and a calm, thoughtful expression. He seemed familiar with the place, interacting comfortably with the staff and other residents. Clara had seen him around before, but they had never spoken. As if sensing her gaze, the man looked up and met her eyes. He smiled warmly, and for the first time since arriving at Sunrise, Clara felt a small spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. The next day, the man approached her as she sat in the garden, enjoying the late afternoon sun. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice gentle and polite. Clara looked up, a little surprised, but nodded. "Sure. I'm Eduardo," he said, extending his hand. "Clara," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but kind, and she found herself relaxing a little. For a few moments, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the birds flit from tree to tree. Then Eduardo spoke again, his voice quiet. "It's a beautiful garden, isn't it?" Clara nodded, looking around. It was indeed beautiful, lush green grass, vibrant flowers in full bloom, and the scent of jasmine in the air. "Yes, it is," she agreed. "I hadn't really noticed before." Eduardo smiled, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "It takes time to notice the little things when your heart is heavy," he said softly. "But they're there, waiting for you." Clara turned to look at him, sensing that he knew exactly what she was feeling. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "About a year," Eduardo replied, leaning back in his chair. "It was hard at first, but, well, life has a way of surprising you." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Surprising you? How?" Eduardo chuckled, a deep, warm sound that made Clara feel unexpectedly at ease. "By giving you something you never thought you'd find," he said, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mystery. Clara looked at him, intrigued. "And what did life give you?" she asked. Eduardo met her gaze, holding it for a moment before answering. "Hope," he said simply. For the first time since she had arrived at Sunrise, Clara felt something shift inside her. It was subtle, like the first glimmer of dawn after a long, dark night. Hope. It was a small word, but it carried so much weight. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she decided to find out. The next few days at Sunrise Rest Home felt different for Clara. It was as if that brief conversation with Eduardo had ignited a small flame within her, one that burned away some of the fog of sadness that had clouded her heart. She found herself looking forward to her morning walks in the garden, hoping to bump into Eduardo again. And she did. Each time they met, their conversations grew longer, more personal. Eduardo was a widower, like Clara, and they bonded over shared experiences. The pain of losing a spouse, the struggle of moving forward, and the love for their children, who had grown up and moved on with their lives. "I never thought I'd end up here," Clara admitted one afternoon as they sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. "I always imagined I'd stay in my own home, surrounded by memories of my husband. But things don't always turn out the way you plan." Eduardo nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I felt the same way. When my wife passed, I couldn't imagine living without her. But my daughter, she insisted, said I needed to be somewhere with people around, where I wouldn't be alone all the time." Clara sighed, understanding all too well. "My son, Lucas, said the same thing. He thought he was doing the right thing, and maybe he was. But it's hard, you know? Letting go of the life you had, accepting that things have to change." Eduardo looked at her, his eyes filled with empathy. "It is hard, but sometimes change can bring new opportunities, new beginnings." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Maybe even new hope." Clara smiled back, appreciating his words. "You're very optimistic, Eduardo. I like that about you." Eduardo chuckled. "Optimism is a choice, Clara. One that I have to remind myself to make every day." As the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself spending more and more time with Eduardo. They developed a routine, morning walks in the garden, afternoons playing chess or cards in the common room, and evenings sharing stories over dinner. Eduardo had a way of making Clara laugh, of helping her see the beauty in the small moments that she had previously overlooked. One evening, as they sat together in the lounge, Eduardo surprised Clara by asking, "Would you like to go out for dinner tomorrow? I know a little Italian place not far from here. The food is good, and it would be nice to get out of this place for a bit." Clara hesitated, a little taken aback by the invitation. She hadn't been out socially in a long time, and the idea of going on what felt like a date made her both nervous and excited. "That sounds lovely, Eduardo. I'd like that." The next day, Eduardo arranged for a taxi to pick them up in the evening. Clara took extra care in getting ready, choosing a dress she hadn't worn in years. A simple, elegant black number that still fit perfectly. She added a touch of makeup and a spritz of her favorite perfume, feeling more like her old self than she had in months. When Eduardo saw her, his eyes widened in admiration. "Clara, you look beautiful," he said, offering his arm as they headed out the door. The restaurant was cozy, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. Eduardo had been right. The food was delicious, and the atmosphere was warm and inviting. They talked and laughed, sharing stories about their lives before sunrise, their families, and their dreams. It felt like they had known each other forever. As they finished their meal, Eduardo reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "Clara, I want you to know how much I've enjoyed getting to know you these past few weeks. You've brought a lot of joy into my life." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You've done the same for me, Eduardo. I haven't felt this alive in a long time." Eduardo smiled, his eyes softening. "I'm glad to hear that, because, Clara, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even considered the possibility of love at this stage in her life. But as she looked into Eduardo's eyes, she realized that she felt the same way. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Eduardo," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft music. Eduardo's smile widened, and he gently squeezed her hand. "I know this might seem fast, but life is short, Clara. We've both seen that firsthand, and I don't want to waste any more time." Clara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Neither do I." They sat there for a long time, holding hands across the table, lost in the moment. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them, together in their own little bubble of happiness. When they finally left the restaurant and returned to Sunrise, Clara felt like a different person. The sadness that had once weighed her down had been replaced by something lighter, something brighter. Hope, love, and the promise of a new beginning. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she replayed the evening in her mind, smiling to herself. She had thought her life was over when she came to Sunrise, but now, she realized it was just beginning. And with Eduardo by her side, she knew that anything was possible. The days that followed their dinner were filled with a sense of anticipation that Clara hadn't felt in years. Every morning, she woke up with a lightness in her heart, knowing that Eduardo would be waiting for her in the garden, ready to start the day with her by his side. It was as though a new chapter in her life had begun, one she had never expected but welcomed with open arms. Their relationship blossomed quickly, fueled by shared experiences and an undeniable connection. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing, laughing at each other's jokes, and finding comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't long before everyone at Sunrise began to notice the change in Clara. The staff smiled knowingly when they saw her with Eduardo, and the other residents often teased them about being the home's newest couple. One afternoon, as Clara and Eduardo were walking hand in hand through the garden, they came across a small group of residents gathered around a table in the common area. They were playing cards and chatting animatedly, their faces lit up with excitement. "Look who's here," called out Margaret, one of the more lively residents, with a mischievous grin. "The Lovebirds. Why don't you join us for a game of bridge?" Clara blushed at the attention but smiled warmly. "We'd love to, Margaret," she replied, glancing at Eduardo, who nodded in agreement. They took seats at the table, and soon the game was in full swing. Eduardo was surprisingly competitive, and Clara couldn't help but laugh at his playful banter with the other players. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and she found herself falling even more in love with him. As the game progressed, Clara realized how much she had missed this, being part of a community, sharing moments of joy and laughter with others. She had isolated herself so much after her husband's death, and even more so after moving to Sunrise. But now, surrounded by these new friends and with Eduardo by her side, she felt like she was rediscovering the simple pleasures of life. Later that evening, after they had won the game and bid their friends goodnight, Clara and Eduardo strolled back to her room. The sun had set, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. They walked in comfortable silence, savoring the peacefulness of the moment. When they reached Clara's door, Eduardo turned to her, his expression serious. "Clara, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Clara looked up at him, her heart fluttering in her chest. "What is it, Eduardo?" He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I know it's only been a short time, but I feel so strongly about you. I never imagined I could feel this way again, not after losing my wife. But you've brought so much light into my life, and I can't imagine my days without you. I was wondering if you'd consider moving in with me." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this, at least not so soon. But as she looked into Eduardo's eyes, she saw the sincerity of his feelings, and her own emotions mirrored his. She had grown to love him deeply, and the thought of spending every day with him, waking up and falling asleep by his side, filled her with a happiness she hadn't felt in years. I don't know what to say," Clara stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "This is all so unexpected, but I can't deny how much you mean to me, Eduardo. I've never felt this way before, not even with my husband. It's different, but it's just as real. Eduardo smiled, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know it's fast, Clara, and I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to waste any more time. Life is unpredictable, and we've both lost people we loved. I just want to make the most of the time we have. Clara nodded, understanding his words completely. She had spent so much time grieving, holding on to the past, but now, with Eduardo, she felt ready to embrace the future. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I'll move in with you. Eduardo's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world around them fading away. In that moment, Clara knew she had made the right decision. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy, content in the knowledge that she had found love again, and that it was as real and as beautiful as the love she had once known. The next day, with the help of the staff, Clara began the process of moving into Eduardo's room. It was a small but cozy space, filled with memories of his life before sunrise. Photos of his late wife, his children, and his travels adorned the walls, and Clara felt honored to be welcomed into this part of his life. She brought a few of her own belongings to make the room feel more like home. Pictures of Lucas, a few favorite books, and a quilt she had made years ago. As they settled into their new routine, Clara and Eduardo found that living together brought them even closer. They discovered each other's quirks and habits. Eduardo liked to read late into the night, while Clara preferred to wake up early and start the day with a cup of tea. They learned to compromise, to share their space and their lives, and in doing so, they built a relationship that was strong and deeply fulfilling. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Clara resting her head on Eduardo's shoulder, she thought about how much her life had changed since she had arrived at Sunrise. She had come here feeling lost and abandoned, believing that her best years were behind her. But now, she realized that life still had so much to offer. New experiences, new friendships, and most importantly, new love. Do you ever think about the future, Eduardo? Clara asked, her voice soft as she gazed out the window at the stars. Eduardo gently stroked her hair, his voice thoughtful. Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it too much. I've learned that the future is uncertain, and all we can do is make the most of each day we have. Clara nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. I used to worry so much about what was ahead, about growing old and being alone. But now, I realize that as long as we have each other, I'm not afraid anymore. Eduardo smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And you'll never be alone, Clara. I promise you that. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his embrace. She knew that their time together might be limited, that life could change in an instant. But for now, she was content to live in the present, to cherish each moment they had together. As they sat there in the quiet of the evening, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had found love again, a love that was different but just as profound as the one she had lost. And in that love, she had found hope, a hope that would carry her through whatever challenges the future might bring. The rhythm of life at Sunrise Rest Home took on a new harmony for Clara and Eduardo. Each day they spent together felt like a precious gift, and they both made a conscious effort to cherish every moment. They continued their routine of morning walks, afternoon games, and evening talks, but now with the added comfort of sharing a space they both called home. The other residents quickly accepted Clara and Eduardo's new living arrangement, and they became something of a symbol for the possibility of love in later life. Seeing them together was a reminder that life's beauty didn't fade with age. It simply evolved, offering new experiences and emotions that could be just as rich and fulfilling as those of youth. One day, as Clara was tidying up their room, she came across a small wooden box on Eduardo's bedside table. It was intricately carved, with a design that looked handmade. Curious, she picked it up and opened it gently. Inside, she found a collection of letters, each one neatly folded and tied with a ribbon. Eduardo entered the room just as she was about to close the box. Seeing her with it, he gave her a soft smile. "You found my letters," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of nostalgia and tenderness. Clara looked at him, slightly embarrassed. I didn't mean to pry. I was just curious. Are these from your wife? Eduardo nodded, sitting down beside her on the bed. Yes, they are. We wrote to each other often when I was traveling for work. She was an incredible woman, Clara, and I'll always love her. These letters are a reminder of the life we shared. Clara placed the box back on the table, her heart swelling with understanding. It must have been a beautiful relationship. It was, Eduardo agreed, his eyes misting over with memories. But that chapter of my life has ended, and now I'm in a new one with you. Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Eduardo, I don't want to replace her in your heart. I know how much she meant to you. He took her hands in his gaze steady. You're not replacing her, Clara. My love for her was deep and true, and so is my love for you. It's different, but that doesn't make it any less real. Life has a way of surprising us, of giving us second chances when we least expect them. Clara squeezed his hands, feeling reassured. I'm grateful for that second chance, Eduardo. I never thought I'd find love again, but here we are. Eduardo smiled and pulled her close. Here we are, he echoed, his voice warm with affection. As the weeks passed, Clara and Eduardo's relationship continued to grow. They spent time getting to know each other's families through stories and photos. Eduardo's daughter, Maria, was an artist living in Barcelona, and Clara loved hearing about her creative adventures. In return, Clara shared stories of Lucas's childhood and his career as a civil engineer, which had taken him all over the world. One weekend, during a rare visit, Lucas came to see Clara. He had noticed the change in his mother during their phone calls and was eager to see it for himself. When he arrived, he was surprised to find her looking more vibrant than he had seen in years. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by a healthy glow, and there was a spark of happiness in her eyes that he hadn't seen since his father had passed. Mom, you look amazing, Lucas said as he hugged her. This place has really been good for you. Clara smiled, knowing there was more to it than just the environment. Thank you, Lucas. I've made some wonderful friends here. And, well, there's someone special I want you to meet. Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Someone special? Clara's smile widened as she led him to the common room, where Eduardo was waiting. As they approached, Eduardo stood up, extending his hand to Lucas. You must be Lucas, he said warmly. I've heard so much about you. Lucas shook Eduardo's hand, studying the man who had clearly made such a positive impact on his mother's life. And you must be Eduardo, Lucas replied. It's good to finally meet you. They sat down together, and Clara watched with a mixture of pride and nervousness as Lucas and Eduardo talked. To her relief, they got along well, sharing stories and laughing easily. Lucas was genuinely happy to see his mother so content, and he could see how much Eduardo cared for her. At one point, Lucas leaned in and whispered to Clara, I can see why you like him, Mom. He seems like a great guy. Clara blushed slightly, feeling a warmth in her chest. He is Lucas. He really is. As the afternoon wore on, Lucas expressed his gratitude to Eduardo for being such a positive presence in Clara's life. I've always worried about my mom being lonely, Lucas said. It's a relief to know she has someone like you looking out for her. Eduardo smiled, his eyes filled with sincerity. Your mother is an incredible woman, Lucas. It's an honor to be a part of her life. When it was time for Lucas to leave, he hugged his mother tightly. I'm so happy for you, Mom. You deserve this. Every bit of it. Clara hugged him back, her heart full. Thank you, Lucas. That means the world to me. After Lucas left, Clara and Eduardo returned to their room, where they sat together in contented silence. The day had been a success, and Clara felt a sense of peace knowing that Lucas approved of her relationship with Eduardo. As they sat there, Eduardo suddenly took Clara's hand, looking at her with a serious expression. Clara, I want to ask you something important. Clara's heart skipped a beat, sensing the gravity of his tone. What is it, Eduardo? He hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want for us. I know we've only been together for a short time, but I feel like we've known each other forever. I love you, Clara, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Clara's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing as she processed his words. She had never expected this. Marriage at this stage in her life? But as she looked into Eduardo's eyes, she realized that she didn't need to think about it. She already knew the answer. Yes, Eduardo, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Eduardo's face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled her into his arms. You've made me the happiest man in the world, Clara, he murmured into her hair. As they held each other, Clara felt a sense of joy and excitement bubbling up inside her. She had thought her life was over when she came to Sunrise, but now, she realized that it was just beginning. With Eduardo by her side, she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. That evening, they shared their news with the staff and residents at Sunrise, who erupted in cheers and applause. Margaret, the resident who had first invited them to play cards, insisted on planning a celebration, and soon the whole home was buzzing with excitement over the upcoming wedding. Clara and Eduardo spent the next few weeks planning their small, intimate ceremony. They decided to hold it in the garden at Sunrise, surrounded by the friends who had become like family to them. Clara's son, Lucas, would be there, as would Eduardo's daughter, Maria, who was flying in from Barcelona for the occasion. As the day of the wedding approached, Clara found herself filled with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She couldn't believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had come to Sunrise feeling broken and alone, but now she was about to marry a man who had brought so much light and love into her life. On the morning of the wedding, Clara stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen for the ceremony. It wasn't extravagant, just a modest, elegant gown that made her feel beautiful. She smiled at her reflection, feeling a rush of happiness and excitement. There was a knock at the door, and Clara turned to see Margaret standing there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I thought you might like these, Margaret said with a grin. You look absolutely stunning, Clara. Clara took the bouquet, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. Margaret waved a hand dismissively. Oh, it's nothing. I'm just so happy for you. You and Eduardo give the rest of us hope, you know? Clara smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. That's exactly what he gave me, Margaret, hope. As Margaret left to take her place in the garden, Clara took one last look in the mirror. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress, and then turned to leave the room, ready to start this new chapter in her life. Outside, the garden had been transformed into a beautiful setting for the wedding. The sun was shining, the flowers were in full bloom, and there was a sense of joy and celebration in the air. Eduardo stood at the end of the aisle, looking dashing in a dark suit, his eyes shining with love as he watched Clara approach. As she walked down the aisle, Clara felt a sense of peace and contentment settle over her. She knew that this was where she was meant to be, with Eduardo, in this place that had once felt so foreign but now felt like home. When she reached Eduardo, he took her hands in his, and they exchanged vows under the shade of the oak tree where they had first talked about hope and new beginnings. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and there wasn't a dry eye in the garden as they were pronounced husband and wife. After the ceremony, they celebrated with their friends and family, enjoying a meal together in the garden. Clara and Eduardo couldn't stop smiling, their joy radiating to everyone around them. As the evening drew to a close and the guests began to leave, Clara and Eduardo took a moment to themselves, sitting together on the bench under the oak tree. Can you believe it? Clara asked, still in awe of everything that had happened. Eduardo chuckled, squeezing her hand. I can believe it because it's real, Clara. We're married, and I couldn't be happier. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Neither could I, she whispered. As they sat there, watching the stars come out one by one, Clara knew that this was the beginning of a new and beautiful chapter in her life. She had found love again, and with it, she had found hope. No matter what the future held, she was ready to face it, hand in hand with Eduardo, her partner, and now, her husband. Life at Sunrise Rest Home settled into a comforting routine for Clara and Eduardo after their wedding. They were now husband and wife, a title that felt both familiar and new. Each day they spent together was a gift, filled with shared moments of laughter, quiet contentment, and the deep connection that had formed between them. The other residents often commented on how the couple seemed to bring warmth and light to everyone around them. Clara and Eduardo were known for their kindness and the way they welcomed others into their lives. Their love story had become an inspiration, showing that it was never too late to find happiness and companionship. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves began to change color and the air turned cool, Clara woke to the smell of fresh coffee wafting through their room. She smiled, knowing that Eduardo was already up and preparing breakfast. She slipped on a robe and made her way to the small kitchenette where Eduardo stood, humming softly as he scrambled eggs. "Good morning, my love," Eduardo greeted her, turning to kiss her on the forehead. "I thought I'd surprise you with breakfast in bed, but I see you're already up." Clara laughed, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I couldn't resist the smell of your cooking. It's too tempting." They sat down together at the small table, enjoying the simple meal. As they ate, they talked about their plans for the day. There was a sense of peace in their daily life, a rhythm that they both cherished. But that morning, Eduardo had something else on his mind. "Clara," he began, his tone slightly more serious, "I've been thinking. We've settled in so well here at Sunrise, but there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Clara looked at him curiously, sensing the weight behind his words. "What is it, Eduardo?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about Maria, my daughter. She's been living in Barcelona for years now, and I haven't seen her in a long time. We've kept in touch through calls and letters, but it's not the same as being with her in person." Clara nodded, understanding where this was going. She had often heard Eduardo speak fondly of Maria, and she knew how much he missed her. "You want to go visit her, don't you?" Eduardo smiled softly. "Yes, I do, and I was hoping you'd come with me. I want you to meet her, Clara. She's a big part of my life, and it would mean the world to me to introduce you to her." Clara's heart swelled with affection for Eduardo. The idea of traveling to Barcelona, seeing a new place and meeting his daughter excited her. But there was also a part of her that hesitated. This would be a big step, a significant journey for both of them. "I'd love to meet Maria," Clara said after a moment of thought. "But are you sure you're up for such a long trip? It's a lot to plan, and it would be a big change from our routine here." Eduardo reached across the table and took her hand. "I know it's a lot, Clara, but I feel it's important. We've both had our share of change recently, and we've embraced it together. This is just another adventure, one we can share." Clara smiled, feeling reassured by Eduardo's confidence. "You're right. It's time for a new adventure. Let's do it." They spent the next few weeks making arrangements for their trip. The staff at Sunrise were supportive, helping them organize the travel details and ensuring that everything would be taken care of while they were away. Lucas and Maria were thrilled at the news, and Maria eagerly offered to show them around her city. On the morning of their departure, Clara and Eduardo stood at the entrance of Sunrise, their suitcases packed and ready. The residents and staff had gathered to see them off, offering well wishes and hugs. "Bring us back some souvenirs," Margaret called out with a grin. "Take lots of pictures," another resident added. Clara and Eduardo waved goodbye, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness as they climbed into the taxi that would take them to the airport. It had been years since either of them had traveled, and the thought of flying across the ocean to a foreign country was both exhilarating and a little daunting. As the plane took off, Clara looked out the window, watching the ground fall away beneath them. She reached for Eduardo's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Are you nervous?" she asked, turning to him. Eduardo smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "A little, but mostly I'm excited. This is going to be a wonderful experience, Clara. I'm so glad we're doing this together." Clara nodded, feeling the same way. "So am I." The flight was long but smooth, and they arrived in Barcelona feeling tired but excited. As they stepped out of the airport, they were greeted by the warm Mediterranean air and the sight of Maria waiting for them with a big smile on her face. "Papa!" Maria exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace Eduardo. "It's so good to see you." Eduardo hugged his daughter tightly, his eyes misty with emotion. "I've missed you so much, Maria." After a moment, Maria turned to Clara, her smile welcoming. "And you must be Clara. I've heard so much about you." Clara smiled back, feeling a little shy but happy to finally meet Maria. "It's wonderful to meet you, Maria. Your father talks about you all the time." Maria laughed, linking arms with Clara as they walked toward the car. "I hope only good things." The drive to Maria's apartment was filled with lively conversation. Maria pointed out landmarks and shared stories about her life in Barcelona. The city was vibrant and full of life, with its unique blend of modern architecture and historic charm. Clara found herself enchanted by the sights, and she couldn't wait to explore more. Maria's apartment was cozy and filled with her artwork, paintings, sculptures, and sketches that reflected her creative spirit. As they settled in, Maria prepared a light meal, and they sat together, chatting and catching up. "So, what's on the agenda for your visit?" Maria asked as they enjoyed their meal. "There's so much to see and do here. I want to make sure you have the best experience." Eduardo and Clara exchanged a glance, both of them feeling a bit overwhelmed by the possibilities. "We're open to suggestions," Eduardo said. "We want to see the city, of course, but mostly we want to spend time with you." Maria smiled, touched by her father's words. "Well, we can definitely do that. I'll take you to my favorite spots, and we'll explore the city together. And if there's anything specific you want to see, just let me know." The days that followed were filled with exploration and discovery. Maria took them to see the famous Sagrada Familia, with its awe-inspiring architecture, and they strolled down the bustling La Rambla, soaking in the sights and sounds of the city. They visited museums, wandered through parks, and enjoyed delicious meals at quaint little restaurants that Maria knew well. One evening, as they sat on Maria's balcony overlooking the city, Eduardo took Clara's hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you for coming with me, Clara. This trip has meant so much to me." Clara smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for bringing me, Eduardo. I've fallen in love with this city, and with your daughter. She's wonderful." Maria, who was sitting across from them, smiled at their words. "I'm so glad you're here, both of you. This has been such a special time for me." As they continued to talk, Clara felt a deep sense of contentment. She had never imagined that she would be sitting on a balcony in Barcelona, surrounded by love and happiness. Life had taken her on an unexpected journey, but she was grateful for every moment of it. Their time in Barcelona passed quickly, and before they knew it, it was time to return to Sunrise. Saying goodbye to Maria was bittersweet, but they promised to stay in touch and to visit again soon. On the flight back home, Clara and Eduardo reflected on their trip, reminiscing about the memories they had made and the bond they had strengthened with Maria. As the plane began its descent, Clara looked out the window at the familiar landscape of home. She felt a sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that she and Eduardo had shared something truly special. When they arrived back at Sunrise, they were greeted with warm hugs and excited questions from the residents. Clara and Eduardo spent the next few days sharing stories and photos from their trip, reliving the joy and excitement they had experienced. Life returned to its comforting rhythm, but there was a new layer of richness to it now. Clara and Eduardo had not only grown closer as a couple, but they had also deepened their connections with their families. They felt more at peace, more content, and more in love than ever before. One evening, as they sat together on their favorite bench in the garden, Clara turned to Eduardo, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Eduardo. For this trip, for your love, for giving me a second chance at happiness." Eduardo smiled, his eyes shining with love. "Thank you, Clara, for being my partner in this beautiful adventure called life. I wouldn't want to share it with anyone else." As they watched the sun set, casting a warm golden light over the garden, Clara knew that this was where she was meant to be. With Eduardo by her side, she had found not only love, but also a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. She was no longer afraid of what the future might bring, because she knew that, together, they could face anything. As the crisp days of autumn began to give way to the chill of winter, life at Sunrise Rest Home continued to be filled with a comforting warmth, not just from the fireplaces that crackled in the common rooms, but from the bond Clara and Eduardo had nurtured since their marriage. The residents and staff saw them as a source of inspiration, a testament that love could bloom at any age, and that happiness could be found in unexpected places. One evening, after a particularly joyful game night with the other residents, Clara and Eduardo returned to their room, laughing and recalling the evening's events. Clara felt a deep sense of contentment as she changed into her nightgown and slipped under the covers. Eduardo joined her, wrapping his arms around her in a comforting embrace. "I've never been this happy, Eduardo," Clara murmured, her voice soft with contentment. "Every day with you feels like a blessing." Eduardo kissed her forehead gently. "And you've made every day of my life brighter, Clara. I never imagined I'd find love again, especially not here. But you've shown me that it's never too late to start a new chapter." They drifted off to sleep, entwined in each other's arms, their hearts full of gratitude for the life they had built together. But life, as it often does, had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. The next morning, Eduardo woke with a slight cough. He waved it off as nothing, attributing it to the dry winter air, but Clara noticed a change in his energy. He seemed more tired than usual, and by the afternoon, his cough had worsened. "Eduardo, maybe we should have the nurse check on you," Clara suggested, her voice laced with concern. Eduardo gave her a reassuring smile. "It's just a cold, Clara. I'll be fine. But if it'll ease your mind, I'll let the nurse take a look." The nurse came by and examined Eduardo, noting that he had a mild fever and prescribed some rest and fluids. Clara stayed by his side, tending to him with a tender care that only deepened their bond. But as the days passed, Eduardo's condition didn't improve. In fact, it seemed to worsen. Clara's concern grew into fear as she watched Eduardo struggle with his cough, his normally bright eyes now dull with fatigue. She insisted on calling a doctor, who, after examining Eduardo, recommended that he be taken to the hospital for further tests. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Eduardo said weakly, trying to comfort Clara as they prepared to leave for the hospital. "But it's better to be safe than sorry." Clara's heart was heavy with worry as they arrived at the hospital. She held Eduardo's hand tightly, trying to be strong for him, but inside, she was terrified. Eduardo had become her world, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. After a series of tests, the doctor delivered the news that Clara had been dreading. Eduardo had pneumonia, and it was serious. His age and underlying health conditions made it difficult for his body to fight off the infection. "We'll do everything we can," the doctor assured them. "But he'll need to stay in the hospital for a while, so we can monitor him closely." Eduardo tried to remain optimistic, but Clara could see the fear in his eyes. He squeezed her hand, his voice shaky. "I'm not ready to leave you, Clara." Clara blinked back tears, her heart breaking. "And I'm not ready to lose you, Eduardo. You're going to get through this. We'll get through this together." The days in the hospital were long and filled with uncertainty. Clara stayed by Eduardo's side, holding his hand and talking to him, even when he was too weak to respond. The staff at Sunrise sent their love and support, and Lucas visited often, offering his strength to his mother. Maria flew in from Barcelona, her face etched with worry as she sat with her father, telling him stories of her life in Spain, trying to keep his spirits up. But as the days turned into weeks, Eduardo's condition remained critical. The doctors did everything they could, but the infection was relentless. Clara's hope began to waver, and she found herself praying for a miracle, desperate for more time with the man she loved. One evening, as Clara sat by Eduardo's bedside, holding his hand and stroking his hair, Eduardo opened his eyes and looked at her. His voice was weak, but it was filled with love. "Clara, my love, I need to say something." Clara leaned in, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here, Eduardo. I'm listening." He smiled faintly, his hand trembling as he reached up to touch her face. I want you to know how much you've meant to me. You brought me back to life, Clara. You gave me a reason to keep going, to find joy again. I'll always love you for that." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened to Eduardo's words. "And you've given me the same, Eduardo. You've shown me that love doesn't have to end, that it can find us again when we least expect it. I love you so much." Eduardo's eyes softened, and he took a shallow breath. "Promise me something, Clara. Promise me that you'll keep living, that you'll find happiness even if I'm not here." Clara shook her head, unable to imagine a life without Eduardo. "Don't talk like that. You're gonna get better, and we'll go back to Sunrise together. We'll have more time." Eduardo's grip on her hand tightened, his voice urgent. "Clara, please, promise me." Clara's heart broke as she realized what he was asking. With a trembling voice, she whispered, "I promise, Eduardo. I'll keep living. I'll try to find happiness. But please, don't leave me." Eduardo smiled weakly, his eyes filled with love. "I'll always be with you, Clara. In your heart. I'll be with you." That night, Eduardo's condition took a turn for the worse. The doctors did everything they could, but in the early hours of the morning, Eduardo passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Clara holding his hand. Clara felt as though her world had shattered. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who had brought so much light and joy into her life, was gone. She sat by his bedside, her heart numb with grief, unable to comprehend the loss she had just experienced. Lucas and Maria were there to support her, their own grief evident as they comforted each other and Clara. The staff at the hospital and Sunrise offered their condolences, but nothing could ease the pain Clara felt in her heart. The days that followed were a blur. Clara returned to Sunrise, but the place that had once been filled with warmth and happiness now felt cold and empty. The other residents tried to offer their support, but Clara withdrew, unable to face the world without Eduardo by her side. One afternoon, as Clara sat alone in the garden, Margaret approached her, sitting down beside her on the bench. For a long time, they sat in silence, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. "I know you're hurting, Clara," Margaret said softly, "and I know nothing I say will take that pain away. But I want you to remember something. Eduardo loved you deeply, and he wouldn't want you to give up. He made you promise to keep living, to find happiness again. And I believe you can, in time." Clara looked at Margaret, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how, Margaret. I don't know how to go on without him." Margaret reached out and took Clara's hand, squeezing it gently. "One day at a time, Clara. That's all you can do. And remember, you're not alone. We're all here for you." Clara nodded, grateful for Margaret's kindness, but still overwhelmed by her grief. She spent the next few weeks in a fog, going through the motions of daily life but feeling disconnected from everything around her. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift within Clara. She thought about the promise she had made to Eduardo, the words he had spoken to her on that last night. He had asked her to keep living, to find happiness again, and she realized that, for his sake, she had to try. Clara began to take small steps toward healing. She started joining the other residents for meals again, though she often felt the pang of Eduardo's absence at her side. She spent time in the garden, finding solace in the beauty of nature, and slowly began to engage in the activities that had once brought her joy. One day, as Clara was walking through the garden, she noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench, looking out at the flowers. Clara recognized her as a new resident who had recently moved in. She was much younger than most of the other residents, and Clara had heard that she had come to Sunrise after a tragic accident that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. Clara approached the woman, her heart going out to her. "Hello," she said gently. "Do you mind if I join you?" The woman looked up, surprised, but nodded. "Sure," she said softly. Clara sat down beside her, and for a few moments, they sat in silence, watching the flowers sway in the breeze. Finally, Clara spoke. "I'm Clara. I've been living here for about a year now." The woman offered a small smile. "I'm Emily. I just moved in a few weeks ago, still trying to get used to everything." Clara nodded, understanding how difficult that transition could be. It can be hard at first, but this place has a way of growing on you. And the people here are wonderful. You'll find your place, Emily. Emily looked down at her hands, her expression somber. I'm not sure I belong here. I never imagined my life would turn out like this. Clara's heart ached for the young woman. She could see the pain and loss in Emily's eyes, and she knew all too well what it felt like to have your life turned upside down. I know how you feel, Clara said softly. I lost someone I loved very much recently, and there were days when I didn't think I could go on. But I made a promise to him that I would keep living, and I'm trying to keep that promise. It's not easy, but I believe that, in time, we can find a way to heal. Emily looked at Clara, her eyes filled with tears. How do you do it? How do you find the strength to keep going? Clara reached out and took Emily's hand, offering her a reassuring smile. One day at a time, Emily. That's all we can do. And remember, you're not alone. We're all here to support each other. As they sat together, Clara felt a sense of purpose begin to stir within her. She had been given a second chance at love with Eduardo, and though he was gone, his love had given her the strength to keep going. Now, she realized that she could use that strength to help others, to be a source of support and comfort for those who were struggling, just as she had been. In the weeks that followed, Clara made an effort to reach out to the other residents at Sunrise, especially those who seemed to be going through difficult times. She shared her story with them, offering words of encouragement and hope. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of healing within herself as she focused on helping others. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the garden with a group of residents, Clara looked around at the faces of her friends, Margaret, Emily, and several others who had become like family to her. She realized that, though she had lost Eduardo, she had not lost the love and connection that had blossomed between them. That love had grown, spreading to others and bringing new meaning to her life. As the sun set, casting a warm golden light over the garden, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Eduardo's love would always be with her, guiding her through whatever challenges the future might bring. And though she would always miss him, she knew that she could honor his memory by living fully, embracing the beauty of each new day. Clara had found hope again, a hope that had been born from love and loss, but one that had grown into something strong and enduring. She knew that life would never be the same without Eduardo, but she also knew that, with the love and support of her friends, she could keep moving forward, one day at a time. Winter gradually gave way to spring at Sunrise Rest Home, and with the change of seasons came a renewed sense of life and energy. The garden, which had lain dormant under a blanket of snow, began to burst with color once more. Vivid tulips, delicate cherry blossoms, and the bright green of new leaves. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of birds returning from their winter migrations. Clara found herself drawn to the garden more than ever, finding solace in the cycle of renewal that mirrored her own journey of healing. The loss of Eduardo was still a deep wound, one that she knew would never fully heal. But as the days grew warmer and the world around her came back to life, Clara felt a flicker of hope rekindling in her heart. She continued to spend time with Emily, who had slowly begun to open up about her own struggles. The young woman had faced tremendous challenges since the accident that had left her paralyzed, and there were days when the weight of her grief and frustration seemed almost too much to bear. But Clara's gentle presence, along with the support of the other residents, helped Emily find the strength to keep going. One afternoon, as they sat together on their favorite bench in the garden, Emily turned to Clara, her eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you, Clara. You've helped me see that there's still a life worth living, even after everything I've lost. Clara smiled, reaching out to squeeze Emily's hand. You've helped me too, Emily. We've both been through so much, but we've found a way to keep moving forward. And that's something to be proud of. Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever think about what's next? About where life will take you from here? Clara looked out at the garden, her gaze softening as she considered the question. I do think about it sometimes. I know that life is unpredictable, and I've learned not to take anything for granted. But I also believe that there are still new experiences, New opportunities waiting for us, no matter our age or what we've been through. Emily smiled, encouraged by Clara's words. I hope you're right. I want to believe that there's more out there for me, that I can still find happiness. You will, Clara assured her. You've already taken the first steps, and you're stronger than you know. Just keep going, one day at a time, and you'll find your way. As the weeks passed, Clara continued to focus on living in the present, cherishing the small moments of joy and connection that filled her days. She spent time with the other residents, helping organize activities and events that brought everyone together. There was a sense of community at Sunrise that Clara had grown to love, a feeling of belonging that had become an essential part of her life. One morning, as Clara was helping Margaret prepare for a spring flower arranging workshop, the head nurse, Linda, approached her with a warm smile. Clara, there's someone here to see you. Clara looked up, surprised. Who is it? It's a man named Peter, Linda replied. He's waiting for you in the lobby. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Peter? The name didn't immediately ring a bell, but there was something familiar about it. She quickly finished arranging the flowers and excused herself, making her way to the lobby with a sense of curiosity and anticipation. As she rounded the corner, she saw a man standing by the entrance, his back to her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that reminded her of Eduardo. When he turned around, Clara gasped in recognition. Peter? She said, her voice trembling with shock and emotion. Is it really you? Peter smiled, his eyes lighting up as he stepped forward to greet her. Yes, Clara, it's me. Clara's mind raced as she tried to process the unexpected reunion. Peter was Eduardo's younger brother, a man she had only met briefly at their wedding. He had been living abroad for years, working as a doctor in remote regions, and she hadn't heard from him since Eduardo's passing. I didn't expect to see you, Clara stammered, still trying to grasp the reality of the situation. What are you doing here? Peter's expression softened as he took Clara's hands in his. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, Clara. After I heard about Eduardo, I wanted to reach out, but I was in the middle of a difficult mission, and it took me some time to get back. But I'm here now, and I wanted to see how you were doing. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked into Peter's kind face. There was a familiarity in his gaze, a reminder of the man she had loved so deeply. But there was also something different, a warmth and compassion that seemed to radiate from him. I'm doing better, Clara managed to say, though her voice was shaky. It's been hard, but I've had a lot of support from the people here. They've helped me through the worst of it. Peter nodded, his grip on her hands tightening. I'm glad to hear that, Clara. I know how much Eduardo meant to you. He meant the world to me too. We didn't see each other often in recent years, but we were always close. I miss him every day. Clara felt a surge of emotion at Peter's words. She had spent so much time grieving Eduardo, but hearing Peter talk about him brought a sense of comfort, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her loss. Would you like to take a walk in the garden? Clara suggested, needing some fresh air to clear her head. It's beautiful this time of year. I'd love to, Peter agreed. They stepped outside into the warm spring air, the scent of flowers filling their senses as they strolled through the garden. For a while, they walked in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Eventually, Peter broke the silence. Clara, I wanted to talk to you about something important. It's been on my mind ever since I arrived here. Clara glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. What is it, Peter? He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before speaking. I know this might seem sudden, but I've been thinking about my own life and what I want for the future. Losing Eduardo made me realize how precious time is and how important it is to be with the people who matter. I've spent so many years working in remote places, far from family and friends, and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be closer to the people I care about, to build a life that's more grounded. Clara listened intently, sensing the sincerity in Peter's words. That sounds like a big decision, Peter. What are you thinking of doing? Peter looked at her, his expression earnest. I'm thinking about staying here, in this area. I've already spoken to the hospital nearby, and they're interested in having me join their team. I've missed so much time with my family, and I want to make up for that. And, Clara, I want to get to know you better. I know we didn't have much time to connect before, but I've heard so much about you from Eduardo, and I feel like you're someone I could build a meaningful friendship with. Clara's heart raced as she processed Peter's words. She hadn't expected this. A chance to connect with Eduardo's brother, to perhaps form a new bond that could help her heal. But at the same time, she felt a pang of uncertainty. Was she ready to open her heart again, even if it was just for friendship? Peter seemed to sense her hesitation, and he spoke gently. Clara, I'm not asking for anything more than your friendship. I know you're still grieving, and I respect that. But I also believe that we both could use someone to lean on, someone who understands what we've been through. If you're open to it, I'd like to be that person for you. Clara took a deep breath, her emotions swirling as she considered Peter's offer. She thought about the promise she had made to Eduardo, to keep living, to find happiness again. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was a step toward fulfilling that promise. I'd like that, Peter, Clara said softly. I'd like to get to know you better too. Peter smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Thank you, Clara. That means a lot to me. They continued their walk, talking about their lives, their memories of Eduardo, and their hopes for the future. Clara found herself feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She hadn't realized how much she had missed having a deep connection with someone, and while it was different from what she had shared with Eduardo, it was no less valuable. Over the next few weeks, Peter became a regular presence at Sunrise. He joined the residents for meals, participated in activities, and spent time with Clara, both in the garden and around the home. The other residents welcomed him warmly, and it wasn't long before Peter became a part of their close-knit community. Clara and Peter's friendship blossomed, built on a foundation of shared memories and mutual respect. They talked about their pasts, their struggles, and their dreams, and Clara found herself looking forward to their conversations. There was a comfort in Peter's presence, a sense of familiarity that made her feel at ease. One afternoon, as they sat together on the bench where Clara and Eduardo had often spent time, Peter turned to her with a serious expression. Clara, I've been thinking a lot about what's next for me. I've decided to stay here, to build a life in this community. And I want to be honest with you. I'm not just staying for the job or the location. I'm staying because I care about you, Clara. I don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, in whatever way you need. Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to Peter's words. She had grown to care for him deeply, but the idea of moving forward, of possibly opening her heart to someone new, was daunting. She still loved Eduardo, and a part of her always would. But she also knew that Eduardo would want her to find happiness, to continue living fully. Peter, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I appreciate your honesty and I care about you too, but I'm still grieving Eduardo, and I don't know if I'm ready for anything more than friendship right now. Peter nodded, his expression understanding. I completely understand, Clara. I don't want to pressure you into anything you're not ready for. I'm here as your friend first and foremost, and that's more than enough for me. Clara smiled, feeling a sense of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Peter. That means a lot to me. I'm glad you're here, and I'm grateful for your friendship. As they sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she didn't have to walk it alone. With Peter by her side, and with the support of her friends at Sunrise, she felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. And in that moment, as the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Clara realized that hope had found its way back into her heart. It was a different kind of hope, one that had been shaped by loss and love, but it was strong and enduring. It was a hope that reminded her that life was full of unexpected possibilities, and that even in the face of sorrow, there was always a chance for new beginnings. Spring gave way to a warm, vibrant summer at Sunrise Rest Home, and the days seemed to stretch out with a lazy, sun-drenched ease. The residents spent more time outdoors, soaking in the sunshine and enjoying the fresh air. The garden was in full bloom, its bright colors and fragrant scents a constant reminder of the beauty of life's ongoing cycle. Clara found herself becoming more comfortable with her new routine, and the darkness that had once clouded her heart was beginning to lift. She continued to grow closer to Peter, their friendship deepening as they spent more time together. He had become a steady presence in her life, someone she could rely on and talk to, someone who understood her grief because he shared it. One afternoon, as Clara and Peter sat on their favorite bench in the garden, Clara noticed something different about the way Peter looked at her. There was a warmth in his gaze that went beyond friendship, a tenderness that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt since Eduardo. She wasn't sure how to react. Part of her felt a sense of guilt for even considering the possibility of feeling something more for Peter, but another part of her felt alive, as if her heart was opening up again after being closed off for so long. "Clara," Peter began, his voice soft and hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we've built together over these past few months. I know we agreed to be friends, and I value that so much. But I can't ignore the fact that I've developed deeper feelings for you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had sensed Peter's feelings, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. Peter reached out and gently took her hand in his. "I don't want to rush you or pressure you into anything you're not ready for, Clara. I just wanted to be honest with you about how I feel. I care about you deeply, and I want to be here for you, no matter what that looks like for us." Clara looked up at Peter, her heart torn between loyalty to Eduardo's memory and the possibility of moving forward with someone new. "Peter, I care about you too," she began, her voice trembling. "But I'm still grieving Eduardo. I'm still learning how to live without him, and I don't know if I'm ready to open my heart to someone else." Peter nodded, his expression gentle and understanding. "I know, Clara, and I don't expect you to make any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. We can take things slow or we can keep things as they are. What matters most to me is that you're comfortable and that we continue to support each other." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Peter wasn't asking her to choose, wasn't pushing her to move faster than she was ready for. He was giving her space, time to figure out her feelings without pressure. "Thank you, Peter. That means so much to me," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. For the next few weeks, Clara and Peter's relationship continued as it had, with a renewed sense of ease and understanding. They spent their days enjoying each other's company, sharing meals, taking walks, and participating in activities with the other residents. There was no rush, no pressure, just a deepening connection that brought Clara a sense of comfort and peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the garden, Peter invited Clara to join him for a picnic dinner under the oak tree. He had prepared a simple meal, sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a bottle of chilled wine, and spread out a blanket for them to sit on. "This is lovely, Peter," Clara said as she settled onto the blanket. "It reminds me of the picnics I used to have with Eduardo when we were younger." Peter smiled, pouring them each a glass of wine. "I'm glad you like it. I thought it would be nice to do something a little different tonight." They ate in companionable silence, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening and the beauty of the garden. The air was warm, but there was a gentle breeze that kept it from feeling too hot, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. After they had finished eating, Peter turned to Clara, his expression serious. "Clara, there's something I want to share with you. It's about Eduardo." Clara's heart skipped a beat, her attention fully on Peter. "What is it?" Peter took a deep breath before speaking. "Before Eduardo passed away, he and I had a long conversation. He talked a lot about you, about how much he loved you, how grateful he was to have found you, and how he wanted you to be happy no matter what happened. He made me promise that I would look after you if anything ever happened to him." Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to Peter's words. She had known how much Eduardo had loved her, but hearing it again, especially now, brought a fresh wave of emotion. "He said that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Peter nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. "Yes, he did. He told me that he didn't want you to be alone, that he wanted you to keep living and find happiness again, even if it wasn't with him." and I promised him that I would be there for you, in whatever way you needed. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and she looked away, overwhelmed by the weight of what Peter had just told her. She had spent so much time feeling guilty for even considering the possibility of moving on, but knowing that Eduardo had wanted her to find happiness again, knowing that he had trusted Peter to take care of her, made a world of difference. I don't know what to say, Peter, Clara finally managed, wiping away a tear. I've been so conflicted, so afraid of betraying Eduardo's memory by even thinking about being with someone else. But hearing this, it changes things. Peter reached out and gently turned Clara's face toward him, his touch light and reassuring. You don't have to make any decisions right now, Clara. I just wanted you to know that Eduardo's love for you was so strong that he wanted you to be happy, even after he was gone. And if that means finding happiness with someone else, then that's what he would have wanted. Clara nodded, her heart heavy with a mixture of grief and relief. Thank you for telling me, Peter. I needed to hear that. They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between them. But it was a comfortable silence, one that was filled with understanding and a shared sense of loss. As the evening wore on and the stars began to appear in the sky, Peter looked over at Clara, his expression soft. Clara, I care about you deeply, and I'm here for you in whatever way you need. Whether it's as a friend, a confidant, or something more, I'm willing to follow your lead. Clara felt a sense of warmth and gratitude for Peter's patience and understanding. I appreciate that, Peter. I'm not ready to make any decisions yet, but I'm grateful to have you in my life. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm open to exploring it, one step at a time. Peter smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. That's all I could ask for, Clara. We'll take it one day at a time, just like you always say. The weeks that followed were filled with small, meaningful moments that brought Clara and Peter closer together. They continued to spend time with the other residents, enjoying the simple pleasures of life at Sunrise. They participated in activities, hosted gatherings, and shared meals, always finding time for each other in the midst of their busy days. But there was also a growing sense of something deeper between them, a connection that went beyond friendship. It was a quiet, steady kind of love, one that had been nurtured by mutual respect and understanding. It was different from what Clara had shared with Eduardo, but it was no less real. One evening, as Clara and Peter sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, Peter took Clara's hand in his. Clara, he began, his voice filled with emotion. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you. I don't want to rush you or push you into anything you're not ready for. But I also want you to know that I'm ready to take the next step whenever you are. Clara looked at Peter, her heart full of gratitude and affection. She had been through so much, and Peter had been there every step of the way, offering his support and his love without asking for anything in return. She knew that she still loved Eduardo, and she always would, but she also knew that she was ready to open her heart to the possibility of loving someone else. I'm ready, Peter, Clara said softly, her voice steady. I'm ready to take the next step with you. Peter's face lit up with a smile, and he leaned in to kiss Clara gently on the lips. It was a kiss filled with tenderness and promise, a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and the possibility of a future together. As they pulled away, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had Peter by her side, and with him, she was ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Together, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. It was a moment of quiet contentment, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Clara had found love again, an unexpected, beautiful love that had grown out of friendship and shared grief. It was a love that honored Eduardo's memory while also allowing her to move forward, to live fully, and to embrace the possibilities that life still had to offer. And as she sat there, hand in hand with Peter, Clara knew that she had made the right choice. She had kept her promise to Eduardo. She had kept living. She had found happiness, and she had opened her heart to love once more. The summer days at Sunrise Rest Home unfolded with a new sense of promise. Clara and Peter's relationship, now deepened by the mutual decision to explore something more, brought a quiet joy that infused every moment they spent together. Their bond was a steady one, marked by gentle affection and shared understanding, and it grew stronger with each passing day. As their relationship blossomed, Clara found herself once again embraced by the community at Sunrise. The other residents, having witnessed the loss she had endured and the strength she had shown, were supportive and encouraging of this new chapter in her life. They saw in Peter and Clara a love that was different from what she had shared with Eduardo, but just as meaningful. One afternoon, while Clara was tending to the garden, now full of vibrant summer blooms, Margaret approached her with a smile. "You've been glowing lately, Clara. It's wonderful to see." Clara looked up, wiping the sweat from her brow, and returned Margaret's smile. "I've been feeling good, Margaret. Life has been kind to me even after everything." Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's clear that Peter cares deeply for you. I can see how happy he makes you." Clara paused, thinking about Peter and the comfort he had brought into her life. "He does make me happy," she said softly. "I never thought I could feel this way again. But he's been so patient, so understanding. It's a different kind of love, but it's real, and I'm grateful for it." Margaret reached out and patted Clara's hand. "You deserve every bit of that happiness, Clara. Don't ever feel guilty for finding joy again. Eduardo would have wanted this for you." Clara's eyes welled up with tears at Margaret's words, and she nodded. "I know, and that's what gives me the strength to keep moving forward." The days continued to pass in a comforting rhythm, filled with small moments of joy and connection. Peter and Clara became a fixture at Sunrise, often seen together in the garden, the dining hall, or during the various activities hosted by the staff. Their relationship was a source of warmth not just for themselves but for everyone around them. One evening, after a particularly lovely dinner, Peter suggested a walk by the nearby lake. The summer air was warm, with a gentle breeze that made the leaves rustle softly in the trees. Clara agreed, enjoying these quiet moments with him more and more. As they walked along the shore, the water reflecting the last light of the day, Peter stopped and turned to Clara, his face serious but full of tenderness. "Clara, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." Clara looked up at him, sensing the importance of what he was about to say. "What is it, Peter?" Peter took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I've been thinking a lot about our future, about what we mean to each other. I know we've both been through a lot, and I know that moving forward hasn't been easy for either of us. But I also know that I love you, Clara. I love you deeply, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara's heart swelled with emotion at Peter's words. She had known for some time that she cared deeply for him, that her feelings had grown into something more than just friendship. But hearing him say it out loud, in this quiet, beautiful setting, made it all feel so real. Peter continued, his voice steady. "I don't want to rush you or make you feel like you have to make a decision right away. But I wanted to be honest with you about how I feel, and I wanted to ask if you'd consider the possibility of us building a life together, not just here at Sunrise, but in whatever comes next." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were tears of happiness, of gratitude for the love that had found her when she least expected it. She reached out and took Peter's hands in hers, squeezing them gently. "Peter, I love you too," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd find love again, not after losing Eduardo. But you've shown me that it's possible, that life can surprise us in the most beautiful ways. And I'm ready to take that next step with you, wherever it leads." Peter's face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled Clara into a warm embrace. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the world around them grew quiet and still, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. When they finally pulled away, Peter looked at Clara with a mixture of love and admiration. "You've made me the happiest man in the world, Clara," he said softly. "And you've brought so much joy into my life." "Peter," Clara replied, "I'm so grateful for you." As they walked back to Sunrise, hand in hand, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that her love for Eduardo would always be a part of her, a cherished memory that had shaped who she was. But she also knew that love wasn't finite. It could grow, expand, and find new expressions in different relationships. She had found a second chance at happiness with Peter, and she was ready to embrace it fully. The next few weeks were filled with the excitement of planning for the future. Clara and Peter talked about the possibility of moving into a larger room together at sunrise, one that they could make their own. They discussed their hopes and dreams, the places they wanted to visit, and the life they wanted to build together. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Peter surprised Clara by pulling out a small velvet box from his pocket. Clara's breath caught in her throat as Peter opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring. "Clara," Peter began, his voice filled with emotion. "I know we've both been through so much, and I know that life can be unpredictable. But I also know that I want to spend whatever time we have left together as your husband. Will you marry me?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the ring, then back at Peter. She had never expected to find love again, let alone to be asked to marry a second time. But as she looked into Peter's eyes, filled with love and sincerity, she knew what her answer would be. "Yes, Peter," Clara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Peter's face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, then pulled her into a deep, loving kiss. It was a kiss filled with promise, with hope for the future and gratitude for the love they had found in each other. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Sunrise, and the residents and staff were thrilled for them. There was talk of another wedding in the garden, and Margaret was already making plans for the celebration. As the days passed, Clara and Peter continued to prepare for their future together. They took care of the necessary paperwork, arranged for their new living space, and began to discuss their wedding plans in more detail. They decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the garden, much like Clara's wedding to Eduardo, but with its own unique touches that reflected their relationship. On the morning of the wedding, the garden was transformed into a beautiful setting for the ceremony. The flowers were in full bloom, and the warm summer air was filled with the scent of roses and lavender. Clara wore a simple white dress, similar to the one she had worn at her first wedding, but with a few modern touches that made it feel special and new. Peter stood at the end of the aisle, looking handsome in a tailored suit, his eyes filled with love as he watched Clara approach. As she walked toward him, Clara felt a mixture of emotions: joy, gratitude, and a sense of fulfillment that she had never thought she would feel again. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with the residents and staff of Sunrise gathered around to witness their union. As they exchanged vows under the shade of the oak tree, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, standing next to Peter, ready to begin this new chapter of her life. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Peter pulled Clara into a gentle kiss, the cheers and applause of their friends filling the air. It was a moment of pure happiness, a moment that marked the beginning of their life together. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, dancing, and toasts to the newlyweds. Clara and Peter were surrounded by love, by the friends who had supported them and cheered them on every step of the way. It was a day that Clara would cherish forever, a day that reminded her of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As the evening drew to a close, Clara and Peter took a moment to themselves, standing together on the porch and looking out at the garden, now bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. "I never imagined I'd find love again, Peter," Clara said softly, her hand resting on his arm. "But here we are." Peter smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Life has a way of surprising us, Clara. I'm just glad we found each other." Clara leaned her head on Peter's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I am too. I'm ready for whatever the future holds, as long as we're together." And as they stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Clara knew that she had found her second chance. Happiness. It was a different kind of love from what she had shared with Eduardo, but it was no less beautiful. It was a love that honored the past while embracing the future, a love that had grown out of friendship, shared grief, and the belief that life still held so much to offer. Together, Clara and Peter were ready to face whatever came next, hand in hand, their hearts full of hope for the days to come. The months that followed Clara and Peter's wedding were filled with a quiet joy and a sense of fulfillment that neither of them had expected to find again. Their life together at Sunrise Rest Home was simple, yet deeply satisfying. Each day, they found comfort in their routines, in the companionship of their friends, and in the love they shared. As autumn approached, the leaves in the garden began to turn golden and red, painting the landscape with the rich colors of the season. The air grew cooler, and there was a sense of change in the air, a reminder that time was passing, but also that every moment was to be cherished. One crisp afternoon, Clara and Peter decided to take a walk around the lake, a place that had become special to them ever since that evening when Peter had confessed his love. The path around the lake was lined with trees that were beginning to shed their leaves, and the ground was covered with a soft, rustling carpet of autumn colors. As they walked hand in hand, Peter glanced at Clara, his expression one of contentment. "I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come," he said, his voice gentle. "It wasn't that long ago that we were both in very different places, struggling with our own grief. And now here we are, together." Clara smiled, squeezing Peter's hand. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? I never imagined I'd find love again, not after losing Eduardo. But you've brought so much light into my life, Peter. I'm so grateful for you." Peter stopped walking and turned to face Clara, his eyes soft with affection. "And I'm grateful for you, Clara. You've shown me that love can be found even in the most unexpected places. You've made these last few months the happiest of my life." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest as she looked into Peter's eyes. There was so much love there, so much understanding. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly. "But you've helped me heal, Peter. You've given me a second chance at happiness, and I want you to know how much that means to me." Peter leaned in and kissed Clara gently, his lips soft against hers. It was a kiss that spoke of all the love they had found in each other, of the journey they had taken together. When they pulled away, Peter rested his forehead against Clara's, their breath mingling in the cool autumn air. "I love you, Clara," Peter whispered, "and I'm so thankful for every moment we've shared." "I love you too, Peter," Clara replied, her voice filled with emotion. "And I'm thankful for you, for everything you've brought into my life." They continued their walk around the lake, the silence between them filled with the comfort of shared understanding. The world around them seemed to slow down, the only sounds the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. It was a moment of peace, of contentment, a moment that they both knew was precious. As they reached the far side of the lake, Clara paused, her gaze drifting out over the water. "Peter," she began, her voice quiet, "I've been thinking a lot about Eduardo lately, about everything he meant to me, and everything we went through together." Peter looked at Clara, his expression filled with understanding. "I think about him too, Clara. He was a good man, and I know how much you loved him." Clara nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her memories. "I'll always love him, Peter. A part of me will always be with him. But I also know that he would have wanted me to be happy, to keep living. And that's what I'm doing with you." Peter wrapped his arm around Clara's shoulders, pulling her close. "I know that, Clara, and I think that's what makes our love so special. It's not about replacing what we've lost, but about building something new, something that honors the past while embracing the future." Clara rested her head on Peter's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "You're right, Peter. That's exactly what it is." They stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip low in the sky, its golden light reflecting off the surface of the lake. As the world around them began to darken, they turned and headed back toward sunrise, their steps slow and measured. When they returned to their room, the chill of the evening air was quickly replaced by the warmth of the cozy space they shared. Clara busied herself making tea, while Peter stoked the fire in the small fireplace. The crackling of the flames filled the room with a comforting sound, and the scent of burning wood mingled with the aroma of the tea. They sat together on the couch, sipping their tea and talking quietly about the day. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting soft shadows that danced on the walls. It was a scene of quiet contentment, of two people who had found a way to make the most of the time they had been given. As the evening wore on, Clara felt a sense of weariness settle over her, the kind of contented tiredness that comes after a day well spent. She leaned her head on Peter's shoulder, her eyes beginning to close. "Are you tired, my love?" Peter asked, his voice soft. Clara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "A little, but it's a good kind of tired." Peter smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Why don't we head to bed, then? We can rest and get ready for another beautiful day tomorrow." Clara nodded again, and together they rose from the couch, their movements slow and unhurried. They climbed into bed, the warmth of the blankets wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. As Clara lay there, her head resting on the pillow, she felt Peter's hand slip into hers under the covers. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace as she drifted off to sleep, the love she had found with Peter filling her heart with warmth. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The seasons continued to change, the world outside the walls of Sunrise moving forward with its own rhythm. Clara and Peter built a life together that was full of love, laughter, and the simple joys of everyday living. But as the years passed, Clara began to notice changes in Peter. Small, subtle things at first, like moments of forgetfulness or a slight tremor in his hands. She brushed them off, attributing them to the natural process of aging. But deep down, a seed of worry began to take root. One day, after a particularly difficult afternoon where Peter seemed confused and disoriented, Clara knew it was time to seek help. They visited the doctor, who confirmed Clara's fears. Peter was showing early signs of Alzheimer's disease. The news hit Clara like a punch to the gut. She had seen the effects of the disease before, had watched as other residents at Sunrise slowly lost themselves to it. The thought of losing Peter in that way was almost too much to bear. But as she looked at Peter, who was sitting beside her, his hand trembling slightly in hers, Clara knew that she had to be strong. For him, for herself, for the life they had built together. "We'll face this together," Clara said softly, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it, one day at a time." Peter looked at Clara, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "I'm so lucky to have you, Clara," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Clara squeezed his hand, her heart breaking even as she forced herself to smile. "You'll never have to find out, Peter. I'll be here, every step of the way." The months that followed were challenging, as Peter's condition slowly worsened. There were days when he was his old self, full of laughter and warmth, and there were days when he was confused, lost in a fog that Clara couldn't penetrate. But through it all, Clara remained by his side, caring for him with a love that was unwavering. As the disease progressed, there were moments when Peter didn't recognize Clara, when he looked at her with a distant, puzzled expression that tore at her heart. But even on those days, there were flashes of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had brought light back into her life when she needed it most. One evening, as Clara sat by Peter's bedside, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep, she thought about the journey they had taken together. They had found each other in the midst of their grief, had built a life filled with love and joy, and had faced the challenges of aging with grace and courage. And now, as Peter's time grew short, Clara knew that she had to let him go. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but she also knew that it was the most loving thing she could do for him. "Peter," Clara whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I love you so much. You've given me more than I ever thought possible. It's okay to rest now. I'll be okay." Peter opened his eyes, and for a brief moment, they were clear and full of recognition. He smiled at Clara, his expression soft and full of love. "I love you, Clara," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for everything." Clara's heart broke as she watched Peter close his eyes, his breathing slowing until it finally stopped. She sat there, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face, as she said her final goodbye to the man who had brought her so much joy. The days that followed were filled with a deep, aching grief, but also with a sense of peace. Clara knew that Peter was no longer suffering, that he was at peace, and that he would always be with her in spirit. The residents and staff at Sunrise offered their support, surrounding Clara with love and kindness as she navigated this new chapter of her life. They held a small memorial service for Peter in the garden, where they shared stories of his warmth, his kindness, and the love he had brought into their community. As Clara stood by the oak tree where she and Peter had exchanged their vows, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the time they had shared. She knew that life would never be the same without him, but she also knew that she would carry his love with her always. And as she looked out at the garden, filled with the vibrant colors of autumn, Clara felt a sense of hope, a hope that had been born out of love, loss, and the belief that life still held so much beauty, even in the face of sorrow. Clara had lived a full life, one filled with love, loss, and the courage to keep moving forward. She had found love twice, had built a life with two remarkable men, and had faced the challenges of aging with grace and strength. And now, as she prepared to face the future on her own, she knew that she would carry the lessons she had learned with her, every step of the way. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the garden, and Clara smiled through her tears. She had loved, and she had been loved in return. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As she turned to walk back inside, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that she had lived a life filled with meaning, and that she had honored the memories of those she had loved by continuing to live, to find joy, and to embrace the beauty of each new day. And as the world around her grew quiet and still, Clara knew that she was ready to face whatever came next, her heart full of love and the knowledge that she had lived a life well lived.